We have people with legitimate concerns about gender ideology. I mean, we have new immigrants that have very strong religious beliefs. They think they're sending their children to a secular school. Yeah, I'm saying that there's a conflict of rights, and public schools need to respect religious rights and the right to free speech, and they also need to respect parents' right to participate in how they want public education to look. I mean, and what it should include.
State choice media and radical gender ideology activists may be celebrating changes to the BC Prosecution Service's hate crime policy because they think it will turn pesky parental rights protesters into convicted criminals. But will these changes actually have the legal impact they're hoping for? I'm Drea Humphrey with Rebel News, and today I bring you an interview with a seasoned criminal defense lawyer to discuss just that.
I really like the preamble to this because it recognizes right off the top that hate crimes are an affront to human dignity.
That was just a quick excerpt of a City News report showing District of North Vancouver City Councillor Catherine Pope applauding the BC Prosecution Service's expansion of its revised Hate Crimes Crown Council Policy Manual. The changes to the service's hate crimes definitions came into effect on the 16th and now include hate offense terms such as anti-Semitism and conversion therapy, which, by the way, in Canada includes counseling an adult who voluntarily sought out services to reduce their non-heterosexual attractions, and can also include counseling children who want to detransition into living in accordance with their biological sex. Another new hate crime term that pops up in the policy is hate propaganda. For example, it reads here that whenever there is a reasonable basis on the available evidence to conclude that an offense was motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate related to hate propaganda, conversion therapy, or mischief driven by bias, prejudice, or hate against a specific group, the Crown should tender the evidence, pursue a finding, and advance a sentencing position that addresses the aggravating circumstances. So what exactly is hate propaganda to the Prosecution Service? The City News report uses frequent North Vancouver overpass rallies that took place last year as a possible example. These rallies consisted of a small group of activists who opposed COVID-19 tyranny and gender ideology, as well as the province's controversial sexual orientation gender identity program in schools called SOGI 123. The activists hoisted up banners like you're seeing on the screen during rush hour traffic, even after a BC court injunction was filed trying to stop them from doing so. Now, of course, that news report failed to mention that a lead protester at those overpass rallies was himself, or is himself, part of the LGBTQ community. And the report certainly doesn't let the public know that the activists they prop up in their interview, like some sort of expert on not hating people, goes by the name of Stephanie and has been seen hanging out with violent Antifa-like types and smirking after people get assaulted, and even dancing to help friends intimidate Christians as they gather for an event. But thankfully, this is Rebel News, and I've brought you someone actually credible to hear from on this matter. She's a seasoned criminal defense lawyer named Karen Bastow with David G. Melbourne Trial Lawyers, and she kicks off our interview with explaining what the BC Prosecution Service's Crown Council Manual actually is and what changes to it likely means in a court of law.
Okay, no. The prosecutor's policy manual is not the law. The law is the criminal code and the cases that interpret the sections of the criminal code. There is nowhere in the criminal code that says you cannot protest against SOGI, and that protest against SOGI is hate speech. And in fact, in other jurisdictions like England, gender critical speech is actually protected speech, and you cannot be prosecuted for it as hate speech. We don't have any legislation that says you can be prosecuted for this speech as hate speech. What a policy manual is it's a document that's created by the managerial people that control sort of the everyday prosecutor. That's based on, in this case, my reading of it is based on wanting to politicize this particular area. And it does have some effect on a prosecutor's discretion. They'll say, well, the new manual says I have to consider this and that, and this manual is a concern for a number of reasons. Like I said, it refers to cases that actually are criminalized already, have nothing to do with Soji. One, they said that it was racism against the Chinese. That's the BC case referred to in the manual, and the other is anti-Semitism, which is explicitly in the criminal code. So yes, it could affect prosecutors, and it certainly looks like this manual is asking prosecutors to tell police to look explicitly in their cases for some evidence that the crime has been motivated by hate. And so a policy manual is a manual that reflects political, the political views of management. I guess you could call them management in that sense. And it's not law. It wasn't voted in. It wasn't debated in the parliament. It's not the criminal code, and it's not judge-made law either. Do I think that putting up a poster saying you're opposed to Soji in a public school is hate speech? Do I think a court would conclude it's hate speech? No, I don't. I see these changes to the policy manual as the usual, which is someone far above the average day-to-day prosecutor who has to deal with me and usually wants to make a reasonable deal to avoid wasting court time. Has to contend with, which is an increasingly politicized managerial class. And that's what I have to say about it.
I do have a question, though. So I wanted to talk about the whole propaganda term being put into there, this hate propaganda.
Yeah.
The example that, let's say, City News used is some banners that were put up in North Vancouver. I covered that extensively. One of those banners said something along the lines of gender ideology in schools is child grooming. And so I'll throw to a clip right here.
It was pretty clear that the RCMP felt the language previously was not clear enough for them to be able to come out and charge people who were displaying messages of hate very frequently out here. And so I'm hopeful that this will now give the police the teeth to be able to charge and convict people who are spreading messages of hate.
So what exactly is at stake here for parental rights protesters that might come out, they put up a poster and they have something they think is witty? Are they at risk now that BC's Prosecution Services has this in writing?
Well, they're not at risk in the sense that the criminal code explicitly bans you from being opposed to gender ideology. It doesn't. It does explicitly ban you from engaging in conversion therapy, and I could talk about that too, but that would be a longer conversation.
Right.
It does explicitly ban that, but it doesn't ban gender critical speech. And if we were to go to, if we were to say, okay, do we need a law that bans gender critical speech to protect transgendered rights? There would be all these academic papers written by feminists and women and religious groups that want to raise their children in a certain way, saying you can't do that because that entrenches on my rights. So there's a conflict of rights. The people that get involved do have to expect that there will be efforts by the activist groups to have them charged and investigated. The police will be encouraged by prosecutors, in accordance with this policy manual, to continue investigations. Defense lawyers will get these cases, and what will happen? Well, most of the cases that come across, and they do come to me, they just sort of get harassed by the police, and it never goes to trial because they know it's not winnable. Or let's say a few people do go to trial, and then the courts are going to say, look, this speech serves a reasonable purpose. They're not inciting hatred in the narrow definition of the criminal code. Nobody's saying that you should go and, burn transgendered people, or that you should do these things. And so those people who are brave enough to be activists may have to suffer to make the point. It's politicized. It's trying to constrain the discretion of reasonable prosecutors who don't probably mostly ascribe to these ideas, and encourage people to, lay charges against legitimate protesters. Do I think it's going to have an effect? Yes, I do. It's definitely going to have an effect. And any reference to propaganda, in the context of hate speech, is, you're trying to suggest that a simple protest about something that's going on in the schools is going to poison the entire population. I mean, that's a ridiculous idea. We have a very educated population. We have a charter that protects our rights to free speech. We have people with legitimate concerns about gender ideology. I mean, we have new immigrants that have very strong religious beliefs. They think they're sending their children to a secular school. Yeah, I'm saying that there's a conflict of rights, and public schools need to respect religious rights and the right to free speech, and they also need to respect parents' right to participate in how they want public education to look. I mean, and what it should include. And Soji is not a doctrine that is universally accepted all over the world as legitimate. It is a doctrine that is being debated all over the world. And as I said, in Europe, gender critical speech, which is speech that says women and children are entitled to separate spaces, safeguarding, is now protected speech. You can't say it's hate speech in England.
At Rebel News, we bring you the other side of the story, including matters of parental rights and freedom of expression. If you wanted to know more about the sexual indoctrination taking place in our schools, or chip in a few bucks to help cover the expenses for our coverage to inform you about such, go to stopclassroomgrooming.com.